You know how they say some of the easiest jobs turn out to be the most difficult? Right here. Right here. This started off as just a simple little piece of rust that was just on the bottom of the Honda. And it was just a little rusted right here at the bottom. And I figured, no problem. I'll just simply, grind that down a bit, make a little piece that just goes across, and just simply weld that in. Hour, maybe two, Bob's your uncle. Yeah. 4 days later, I finally got the piece ready to go in. And I probably should have filmed this entire thing because it was a very long process and a lot of work went into it. But I kind of got into it, got started. I didn't have any photos or film of the early stages. So I decided, well, maybe I'll just film the end and we'll kind of go from there. So what had happened was there was a little bit of rust right in here. And this is actually the jack support. So when you're jacking the car, you put the jack under here. Anybody that has a second gen Honda knows what I'm talking about. Well, it was rusty right about there. And it had just sort of worked up into this little flange that hangs down. And it looked really simple. So I cut that away and decided, okay, I'm just going to make a repair. Well, I noticed it rusted further up. And the jack support itself was actually really rusty. And so I kept grinding and realized that this was more rust than anything. Kept going and wound up grinding my way through 5 layers of metal, till finally I got all the rust off. And that is factory Honda. That's how Honda did it. And I'm really impressed about the way Honda did things, because a lot of the times car manufacturers will make these jack points and make them weak, just strong enough to lift the car, but not so much. Whereas Honda actually bothered putting an inner layer, a reinforcement bracket, the jack bracket, the outer panel, everything on there. And Honda did a lot of things that other manufacturers might not. And like I noticed on inside of the rocker panel, they actually bothered to spray an epoxy primer after welding. A lot of cars you'll see, especially of this era that are 40 years old, the rockers are gone. There's nothing left. You got to replace the whole damn rocker. Whereas on Hondas, you might get a little spot of rust here or there, and it's not really clear why it only rusts on a little few areas. And that's because Honda actually took the time to bother spraying epoxy primer up inside to see to it that it doesn't rust, and they make for a better product. As I've been working on this Honda, I have noticed there's a lot of things that Honda did that they never told anybody about, but they did do it to make a better product. Like when I was rebuilding the engine, they actually painted inside the oil pan. Inside. Like, they didn't tell anyone that, oh, we paint inside the oil pan. Nobody does that. No American manufacturers do that. Why do they do it? Because it makes for a better product. It prevents corrosion on the inside of the engine and rust from circulating throughout the oil. Awesome. So, with this, like I said, I went through 5 layers till finally I got through it. So this is now the outer rocker. This is like an inner reinforcement panel that only goes from here to here. Then you've got actually the jack point. Then you've got the inner rocker. And then you actually have a flange that hangs down, which actually makes up part of the actual floor pan. So by the time you're done, you're actually getting through 5 layers. But it makes for an extremely strong jack point, which is what Honda wanted. So then I had to spend a total of 4 days repairing this, and finally I spent the whole day yesterday just making this. Looks pretty simple, but a lot of little bends, a lot of little intricacies to it. As you can see, I actually had to put a stamp into it, and I'm going to show you how I made this and how I'm going to install it. So in making this panel, I simply took a piece of cardboard, made myself a template, and then flattened out the cardboard and traced it out onto metal. Cutting out the metal, ground it to shape. But if you notice, there's this little high spot right there. And this just goes over this little bump right here where Honda had pressed it in. So just to make an extra little reinforcement bump in order to reinforce this jack point. Well, how do you make that? How do you make this little bump? Well, took some 1/4 inch steel and a little piece of 1/8 thick, about 1 inch by 1/8 piece of steel, welded it on. Simply put the metal on top, used my planishing hammer, turned it around, just used the other side and tapped it. And you would be shocked how easy it is to make something like this easy. It actually took me longer to make this than it did to make this. And you take your planishing hammer, just simply tap around those edges, and you will actually create this form, this shape, this little bump into the metal, and metal will just take to that shape that's underneath of it. So while I was making this, what I actually had to do is, the rust was actually quite small just at the bottom, but in order to access the rest of it, I actually had to cut this window. So don't be worried about having to cut away a little bit or make little access ports in order to repair other structure inside. It's easy to repair. Like, this is easy to make. I just cut a chunk off an old Camaro. It's being welded on. So inside here, I simply sprayed that full of zinc primer, and I sprayed it all the inside, because when you're welding, when I weld other areas, you're actually going to wind up burning the epoxy primer that Honda shot inside there. And so you want to replace that with a zinc-based primer, and this will prevent rust and corrosion. So before I actually weld though, where the welds are actually going to be, I used a copper-based primer, not zinc. Zinc has a very low vaporizing point. Copper has a very high vaporizing point. So you want to use copper, because copper will liquefy and then resolidify. Vapor will simply liquefy, vaporize, and disappear. And then you have nothing. You might as well use nothing at all. So I'm going to spray on the copper-based primer on this, buzz this in, and no one will ever know that anything's ever been done here. So as you can see, this has all been welded. The welds are actually here and here. I had to weld this up underneath. I actually had to put a weld in here and here and replace this piece of this inner bracket. There's actually 5 layers here. Honda really over-engineered this, but I guess if you're going to put all your jack weight here, or put a jack stand under here, you need it to be strong enough so that it supports the car, supports all the weight of the vehicle, and won't crumble and crush. Unless it gets rusty, well, that's a different story. I'm very shocked how Honda actually bothered to spray an epoxy primer on the inside of the rocker panel. There's actually an access port back here, and they sprayed inside, and they never told anyone they did this. It just simply made for a better product. Honda did it, and you gotta love Honda. They just simply want to make the best product there is, and they do. And here's the panel, all burned in, welds ground down. I think that turned out pretty nice. I'm happy with how this turned out. Nice and solid. Once this is painted and the gravel guard is sprayed back on, you won't be able to tell anything was ever done here. I'm probably never going to use this to jack up the car again, but at least it looks factory, it looks original, and if for any reason a jack ever goes here, I know it's going to be strong enough to be able to lift the car and not have any problems. Otherwise, I think this turned out really nice. So now I'm going to spray this with a zinc-based primer to prevent rusting. Underneath, before I welded, I sprayed it all with a copper-based primer, burned it in, and now zinc based on top. There's a little access port right back here where I'm actually going to spray zinc based primer on the inside to prevent rusting from inside out, and top coat of zinc on top, and this will prevent rusting from the outside. And once sprayed with a gravel guard, this will look factory and I'll never have to worry about it again.